in the vast blue immensity of the Pacific, where islands were mere specks and fleets clashed like floating cities of steel, the year 1944 marked the height of humanity's greatest naval confrontation. The ocean was alive with movement, carriers launching waves of aircraft, destroyers cutting through the surf, and submarines lurking in the black depths. Yet amid this chaos, one modest vessel, a destroyer escort named USS England, DE 635, would carve her name into naval immortality. Between May 19th and May 31st, 1944, England would hunt down and destroy 6 enemy submarines in only 12 days, a feat that no other ship in naval history has ever matched. This was not the story of a giant battleship or an aircraft carrier bristling with planes. It was the story of a small ship, a tight-knit crew, and a mission fueled by intelligence, innovation, and relentless courage. The story began not with cannon fire, but with a radio signal. In a plain wooden building in Pearl Harbor, far from the front line, a handful of U.S. Navy cryptanalysts at Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, FUPAC, intercepted a seemingly mundane Japanese message on May 13, 1944. It was a simple transmission, an update from submarine I-16 to her division commander, reporting an estimated arrival near Bougainville on May 22nd. To an untrained eye, it was meaningless routine. But to America's codebreakers, heirs, to the legendary station Hypo that helped win Midway, it was gold. Hidden in those numbers and grid coordinates lay a chance to strike Japan's undersea fleet at its heart. In secret rooms filled with IBM punch card machines and the rhythmic tapping of typewriters, cryptanalysts decrypted, mapped, and relayed the data. Hours later, an order crackled across the Pacific. A hunter-killer group was to form immediately. At Tulagi, Solomon Islands, the order reached Commander Hamilton Haynes, a veteran destroyer officer who had once hunted German U-boats in the Atlantic. His orders were clear: intercept and destroy the Japanese submarines identified in the decoded message. He assembled 3 of the Navy's newest destroyer escorts, USS George, DE 697, USS Rabi, DE 698, and USS England, DE 635, forming a compact but deadly hunter-killer team. Their crews were young, some barely 20, but well-drilled and hungry for action. Each ship bristled with new sonar gear, radar, and a revolutionary weapon, the Hedgehog, a forward-firing anti-submarine mortar. On May 18, 1944, the 3 ships steamed out of Purvis Bay, their wakes trailing white ribbons under the tropical sun. Ahead lay an invisible enemy, silent, patient, and deadly. Unbeknownst to the Japanese, their radio system had become their own undoing. The decrypted intercepts revealed that the Imperial Navy had positioned 7 submarines along a line, the NA line, stretching from the Admiralty Islands to Truk Lagoon. The plan was to detect American carrier movements ahead of Japan's next great defensive operation, Operation A-Go. But in their rigidity, the Japanese had sealed their fate. Each submarine was fixed to a precise grid, ordered to stay in position regardless of risk. The Americans knew exactly where to find them. What followed was not chance, it was calculated annihilation. And at the center of it all, USS England was about to prove that precision and training could triumph over experience and size. What gave England her edge was not luck, but innovation. The Mark X Hedgehog, a British-designed anti-submarine weapon, was unlike any before it. Instead of dropping depth charges that exploded blindly, the Hedgehog fired 24 small bombs ahead of the ship in a tight elliptical pattern. Each would detonate only on contact, meaning silence meant failure, and an explosion meant a confirmed kill. The advantage was enormous. The ship could maintain sonar contact throughout the attack, adjusting instantly for another strike. Reload time, barely 3 minutes. Where depth charges took dozens of attempts per kill, Hedgehogs averaged success every 5 or 6. For Japan's submarine fleet, it was a silent reaper. USS England's crew trained with obsessive discipline, drill after drill, until every man knew the rhythm: ping, plot, fire, reload. They were ready. The first contact came on May 19, 1944. Sonar operators aboard England picked up a faint echo, solid, rhythmic, unmistakably metallic. It was I-16, the very submarine whose message had triggered the hunt. Beneath the waves, her commander, Lieutenant Yoshitaka Takeuchi, maneuvered desperately, ordering hard turns and sudden dives. The Americans attacked again and again, 5 times in total. For over an hour, the sonar pings and engine rumbles played like a deadly heartbeat. Then, at 2:35 p.m., England fired another salvo. This time, multiple impacts. The sea erupted. The explosion was so violent that England's stern lifted from the water, throwing sailors off balance. Moments later, rice bags, wood fragments, and a single white sandal floated to the surface. Grim proof that I-16 and her 107 men were gone. Every ship carries ghosts, and USS England was no exception. She bore the name of Ensign John Charles England, a 20-year-old officer who had died at Pearl Harbor after saving 3 trapped sailors from the sinking battleship USS Oklahoma. He could have escaped, but he went back below deck one final time and never returned. Now, 3 years later, a ship bearing his name avenged him in the most fitting way imaginable. His courage lived on through every man who served aboard. When they painted DE 635 on her hull, they didn't just mark steel, they etched a promise that no sacrifice would be forgotten. Word of England's first success spread fast through the Pacific Fleet, but the celebration was short-lived. Intelligence revealed more submarines along the NA line, and Commander Haynes ordered his group north. On May 22nd, radar picked up a surface contact, RO-106. The submarine tried to dive, but England's sonar was already locked. After a brief chase and 2 missed runs, the third Hedgehog pattern found its mark. The resulting detonation split the submarine apart. Within minutes, oil, cork, and torn clothing rose to the surface. 49 men were gone. 1 day later, on May 23rd, another submarine, RO-104, was spotted and sunk after a grueling 2-hour duel. 2 kills in 2 days. England's crew began to realize they were part of something historic. By now, England's bridge and sonar rooms moved like clockwork. Every man understood his role, the sonar operator's voice cutting through the static, the captain's calm orders, the gunnery officer's precise timing. They slept in shifts, often eating cold rations between attacks. The sea was their battleground and graveyard both. On May 24th, they hunted RO-116, a young crewed submarine on its second patrol. After several evasive dives, England's third salvo struck home. The submarine broke apart quietly. No massive explosion, just a single plume of oil and silence. The war had become methodical. In the Pacific's vastness, death could now arrive with mathematical precision. For 12 straight days, the ocean itself seemed to hold its breath. Each sunrise brought another contact. Another submerged shadow hunted to extinction. By the end of May 24, the crew had become ghost-pale from sleepless nights. Salt spray crusting on their uniforms, adrenaline the only fuel that kept them upright. They were no longer surprised when sonar pings turned into explosions. They simply braced and waited for the surge of pressure that followed each kill. What had begun as an experimental patrol was turning into legend. The men on deck whispered that the sea was giving up its secrets one after another, as if fate itself had marked every Japanese submarine for England's guns. The next signal came on May 26, 1944, a faint radar echo at 15,000 yards, RO-108, a battle-scarred veteran that had once torpedoed the destroyer USS Henley. She was experienced, cunning, and her captain, Lieutenant Ori Konichi, knew how to dance with death. Yet when England and her sister ships closed in north of Manus Island, even experience couldn't save her. Rabies struck first. The submarine twisted beneath the waves, loosing a decoy oil slick. George followed, no hit. Then England moved in, calm, deliberate, At 23:23 hours, the Hedgehog batteries fired. 6 impacts. The blast was instantaneous and final. Her 0108 broke apart before her crew could even close watertight doors. The explosion's white column reached toward the clouds, reflected in every pair of astonished American eyes. The veterans of Henley were avenged. Japan's remaining commanders were baffled. How could their submarines, scattered across thousands of miles, vanish one by one with pinpoint precision? Some believed American aircraft were shadowing them. Others suspected luck. Only a few realized the truth, that their encrypted messages were being read almost in real time. Inside the radio shacks of the Sixth Fleet, operators sent frantic warnings. Submarines being lost near Admiralty Islands. Change patrol zones immediately. But 2 captains, RO-109 and RO-112, heeded the call too late. RO-105, commanded by Lieutenant Junichi Ino with Division Commander Captain Kato aboard, remained defiantly on station. Duty, pride, or poor reception, it no longer mattered. The hunters were coming. After rearming at Seadler Harbour, England and her companions re-entered the hunt. The tropical night was glass-smooth, stars sharp enough to pierce the darkness. At 22:45 hours, destroyer USS Hazelwood picked up a contact, RO-105. The submarine dove immediately, beginning a running battle that would last nearly 9 hours. Depth charges from Hazelwood thundered, their columns rising like underwater volcanoes. RO-105 twisted, discharged decoys, then plunged deeper, her hull groaning under pressure. At dawn, the surface slick shimmered with oil, but the contact persisted. The Japanese crew, battered and bleeding, fought to keep her alive. Above, the Americans rotated ships in and out of the attack line, determined to end the duel. By mid-morning on May 31st, Commander Haynes's frustration broke through the radio. "Oh, hell," he barked. "Go ahead, England." Every man aboard understood. The captain trusted them to finish what others couldn't. Pendleton's calm voice filled the intercom. "Stand by, Hedgehog. Fire 1, the pattern roared forward. Seconds later, the Pacific erupted in a detonation so immense it was heard miles away. 6 to 10 warheads struck. RO-105's torpedoes cooked off in sympathetic blasts that hurled debris skyward. When the shockwave passed, the ocean was littered with fragments, planks, sandals, bits of uniform, and a spreading slick of rainbow oil. 55 men had died in an instant. In 12 days, 6 submarines were gone. England's mission was over. History had been written. When the news reached Pearl Harbor, Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Ernest J. King sent a single line of signal traffic. "There'll always be an England in the United States Navy." To the tired crew, that sentence meant more than medals or promotions. They had accomplished the impossible, 6 submarines in 12 days. No carrier, no cruiser, no fleet had done what a single destroyer Escort achieved through discipline and trust. Each sailor felt the ship's namesake standing beside them. Ensign John C. England, the young hero of Pearl Harbor, finally avenged. The destruction of the NA line did more than thin Japan's undersea ranks. It distorted their entire strategic vision. Believing a major U.S. force had slipped through toward New Guinea, Admiral Toyoda redeployed his fleet in the wrong direction. When the real American objective, Saipan, was revealed, it was too late. The delay helped set the stage for the Battle of the Philippine Sea, where Japan lost 3 carriers and 400 planes in the Marianas Turkey Shoot. USS England's dozen days of work had indirectly altered the course of the Pacific War. From that point on, Japan's submarine arm was broken, and its pilots would never again threaten the U.S. Navy on equal terms. When England finally moored at Purvis Bay again, silence hung over her decks. There were no cheers, no brass bands, just the sound of waves slapping the hull. In the mess hall, sailors passed around the debris recovered from the sea, a Japanese cap, fragments of wood, and a single rice bag. They spoke little, knowing that beneath each calm horizon lay hundreds of men who would never return home. War had demanded precision from them, but it had also demanded humanity's heaviest price. Pendleton and his officers filed reports, restocked ammunition, and prepared for the next patrol. The ocean gave no rest to heroes. Long before England ever sighted her first target, another war was raging in silence, a war of ciphers, frequency lists, and intercepted static. Deep within nondescript offices in Hawaii, Washington, and Australia, rows of cryptanalysts deciphered the Japanese Navy's heartbeat. These men and women, unseen and unnamed, turned mathematics into a weapon sharper than steel. They knew that every broken code meant ships could move first, strike first, and live longer. When England's sonar pinged across the Pacific, it was the echo of their invisible victory, the living proof that information had become the most lethal ammunition of the 20th century. For the crew aboard England, science became instinct. Sonar was their sixth sense, translating the deep into music of survival. Each metallic echo carried its own signature: the slow pulse of a whale, the rhythmic cadence of a propeller, the unmistakable heartbeat of a submarine. The sonar men learned to read those rhythms as easily as others read faces. They sat for hours, headphones clamped tight, pencil tracing grease marks on plotting tables, calling out bearings in calm voices while death lurked a few hundred yards below. In that dark theater of sound, technology met human intuition, and together they hunted the unseen. The destroyer Escort program itself was an industrial miracle. In just over 2 years, American shipyards produced more than 150 Buckley-class vessels, each assembled by civilian hands that learned as they worked. Housewives, students, and farmers became welders and machinists. They built ships not for glory but for necessity, pouring molten ambition into steel. England was the embodiment of that national momentum, inexpensive, efficient, deadly. She was proof that victory in modern war depended not only on valor, but on the capacity to think, organize, and outbuild the enemy. While England's crew celebrated brief moments of triumph, somewhere far across the sea, families in Japan waited for letters that would never arrive. The Imperial Navy's submarine arm had once been its pride, silent hunters that had prowled the Indian and Pacific Oceans with impunity. By mid-1944, that pride was turning to despair. Officers at Yokosuka stared at lists of missing boats, knowing the Empire's lifelines were snapping one by one. Still, duty bound them to continue. For the men of those doomed submarines, the ocean became both battlefield and coffin, a quiet reminder that courage existed on both sides of the horizon. Historians still debate how one small ship achieved such statistical perfection. Some credit Pendleton's cool precision, others the seamless teamwork between sonar and gunnery crews. But those who were there remember something deeper, a rhythm of unity that erased fear. In those 12 days, the England ceased to be a collection of men and machines. She became a living organism, reacting, thinking, striking as one. Each kill brought exhaustion and guilt as well as pride. They wrote letters home but never mentioned the sinking of submarines. They spoke instead of calm seas and good weather. Victory carried its own silence. In July 1944, the Navy awarded the Presidential Unit Citation to USS England, an honor shared by only 2 other destroyer escorts during the entire war. Lieutenant Commander Pendleton received the Navy Cross, and his executive officer, John A. Williamson, was promoted to command. Yet medals could not quantify what the crew had endured. They had fought an enemy they rarely saw, in battles measured in sonar echoes rather than gunfire. When they stood on deck during the ceremony, they saluted not the brass handing out ribbons, but the empty sea that had swallowed hundreds of souls, enemies and brothers alike. The success of England transformed how navies conceived anti-submarine warfare. Training manuals were rewritten. Sonar schools played recordings of her attacks. Design bureaus accelerated work on forward-firing weapons. Within months, Hedgehog launchers were installed on escorts across both oceans. The Navy's tactical thinkers realized that information and coordination had become as decisive as firepower. England's story proved that even in an age of giant carriers, a single well-trained crew armed with the right data could change the course of strategy. In later decades, sonar tracking, electronic warfare, and precision depth weapons would all trace their lineage back to this small ship's 12-day rampage. After June 1944, the Pacific shifted again. Invasions rolled westward, island by island. England joined escort convoys, screened carriers, and hunted the few submarines still daring to surface. To the casual observer, she was just another grey silhouette on a horizon crowded with warships. But among sailors, her name carried a quiet awe, shorthand for perfection. New crews whispered that serving aboard her meant luck, though the men who had lived those 12 days knew better. Luck had nothing to do with it. It was discipline, training, and the unbreakable will to survive in a war that devoured the unprepared. By early 1945, England was in the thick of the Okinawa campaign, guarding transports from kamikaze attack. On May 9th, almost exactly a year after her submarine hunts, a Japanese dive bomber struck near her stern. Fire erupted through the aft gun deck. Several sailors were killed, many burned. Damage control teams fought the blaze for hours, sealing compartments and flooding magazines to prevent detonation. She limped back to Ulithi, smoke still rising, but refused to sink. The ship that had destroyed 6 submarines would not be destroyed herself. Her crew patched her wounds with steel and stubbornness, proof that courage was not confined to moments of victory. When Japan surrendered 3 months later, England was anchored quietly at Ulithi, her decks scarred and paint scorched. She would return home to a United States transformed, banners in streets, families waiting at train stations, and the uneasy joy of peace. For the crew, the silence felt heavier than battle. The clang of hammers in the shipyard echoed like memories of sonar pings. Some men re-enlisted, others went back to farms, schools, and small towns that had no idea what they had done across the ocean. The world moved on, but within them, the sea never stopped whispering. True to Admiral King's promise, there really would always be an England. In 1963, a new guided missile cruiser bearing the same name, USS England, CG-22, joined the fleet. Sleek, radar-topped, and nuclear-era modern, she carried within her steel DNA the memory of a small destroyer escort that had once defied history. At commissioning, surviving crewmen from DE-635 stood together on the pier, older, slower, but still proud. When the new captain saluted them, a gust of Pacific wind rattled the signal flags, and for a moment they swore they could hear the distant echo of Hedgehogs firing into the deep. Naval historians still study those 12 days as a masterclass in integrated warfare, intelligence, sonar, and leadership working as one. The principles forged aboard England shaped Cold War anti-submarine doctrine, from sonar buoys to computer-linked destroyer screens. In every NATO exercise that practiced submarine hunting, her ghost was present. She had proven that even in an era of mass production, precision and human coordination could achieve miracles. Long after her hull was scrapped, naval cadets whispered her name like a challenge, a reminder that perfection, though fleeting, was possible. Today, the coordinates of those 6 submarine graves lie forgotten on most maps, somewhere amid the warm currents north of the Solomons. Coral and silence have reclaimed the wrecks, steel now home to fish and coral polyps. Yet if one could dive deep enough, one might still see a twisted propeller or the kanji of a nameplate half buried in sand. The ocean keeps its memories. It remembers the days when technology and courage met, when a single ship turned the tide of a hidden war. And above those depths, the same trade winds still move, whispering over an endless blue horizon the story of the USS England, the ship that sank 6 submarines in 12 days, and proved that heroes can be made not by size or power, but by resolve.
In war, there are moments that vanish like waves and moments that carve themselves into history. The USS England was one such moment. 12 days when courage, code-breaking, and sheer human focus aligned to change the course of an oceanic war. Her decks were narrow, her guns small, but her spirit spanned the Pacific. She hunted in silence, struck with precision, and then returned to obscurity, leaving behind not monuments but lessons. In every sonar ping that echoes through the seas today, her story endures. Proof that sometimes the mightiest weapon afloat is the will of those who refuse to fail.